Good evening. Welcome to Paranormal Experienced with Kat Hobson. I'm so glad that you are here. We have been having some Christmas spirits joining us tonight, so this might be exciting. But we're going to do the best we can with what we've got because you know what? I'm so excited. Um, I love my guest that I have tonight, and I know y'all do too. He is one of the most adventurous paranormal investigators I know. He loves to go and involve himself with conventions. He loves to visit all kinds of neat places. And he's pretty amazing. Just saying. His name is Nick Muley. He is part of the Things Network. He is the chapter in Illinois. He is the host of the Nick Files. He is a large part of the 13th Dimension with Jeremy York. And he does a little bit of everything with everyone. And I'm so glad to call him my friend. So let's welcome Nick Muley.
Hi, Kat.
Hey, my friend. How you doing?
I'm doing great. How about you?
I'm doing great too. I'm so pleased to see you.
Yeah, it's definitely great to be back on this once again, chatting with you. It's always a great time being on here.
I just enjoy you so much. And Jeremy's in chat, and Lori Dorsey says that she's watching. So, hey guys. So, and Jan, hey Jan. So, I am really, I've been impressed with you for so long. I think that you're one of the more fun people in the paranormal. You're so enthusiastic about everything that you do, really. I mean, you just enjoy things. And
Absolutely.
that is such a gift. It genuinely is because, it's real easy. And you just had a health scare. And it's real easy to kind of sad sack around and, you know, oh, woe is me. Or, people that get off on the politics. It's like, oh my goodness, the world is falling down. And, there have been times when the world has fallen, to the side a little bit. It always comes back, right? But it's just, but it takes great people to make that happen. But I am so, you're always so positive.
Yeah, I try to stay that way as much as I possibly can, even during the worst of times. So I just think it's always best to just keep that kind of positive attitude going with whatever was going on, in spite of, like you just mentioned about, like with my health scare I had a couple weeks ago. I was, for the most part, it was just trying to stay strong as much as I
Yeah.
can.
Well, it wasn't really a health scare. It was an actual health incident.
Yes, it was.
And it's one of those things that, I mean, it could have gone sideways. It didn't. And I know that your mom was by your side through the whole thing. I know that you've got really strong support and you've got a whole lot of people who absolutely adore you in the paranormal field. So that's nice too.
It
And
definitely was.
because I know there were a lot of prayers up for you, man.
Yeah, it
Um,
was. I desperately needed them during that time while I was away, because it was a very rough time for me. It really was.
what do you credit with other than your attitude? Because it's really hard, right? I've had health incidents. It's really hard to hold that positive thing. And I mean, people call me a Pollyanna all the time. I don't think that's appropriate, but I am happy and positive. And, but it's hard when you're facing a crisis like that. And did you just do it kind of like well, there's no way but forward? Or, what was your thing that helped you the most?
I think it was just the fact that, despite that, because anyone who's gone through such an experience like that, even though, yes, technically you're pretty much by yourself, personally throughout the whole
Mhm.
thing, you have, in some way, shape, or form, you still have several other people who are in some way, shape, or form by your side,
Mhm.
and making sure that, that you're not going to I guess, fall off the edge, for lack of a better term.
It's a good term.
That's probably the best way I could kind of describe it. And even though there were times that it feels like it was like never enough, I still had that. I just knew I had that support, no matter what the case was.
Yeah.
And I think that's what kind of kept me going, even though it seemed like it was hopeless during that time period I was in.
Yeah. Well, it probably felt hopeless. I mean, because anytime that your body kind of goes sideways on you, it's trippy. It's like,
Yeah,
oh
very
my God,
much so.
what are you doing to me? Yeah. I mean, it is. It's a, it's out of control. And
Definitely.
we're not accustomed to not having control of situations, or at least trying to. But bodies are their
Absolutely.
own thing.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that
So,
was just, I mean, that was obviously an experience of something that hopefully I never have to go through again, but at
from your
least,
mouth to God's ear, man.
yeah.
So,
Uh,
yeah.
but like I said, I was just glad that I had as much support as I, possibly could during that time period, because I was away for a good week when that all happened.
Yeah, you were. It was a little more than that, wasn't it?
I had to go to the ICU around on Tuesday, and I was there. Yeah, I was there for an entire week till I
Mm-hmm.
didn't get out until the following Tuesday, back in November.
Mm-hmm. So, well, I'm going to tell you that as scary as that was, things happen for a reason. And I think that you're going to find a lot of different ways that this affects some of the things that you love to do.
Yes, yes,
And I'm not going to lie, sometimes abilities show up as a result of the kind of thing that you went through.
it's it's
So,
funny you mentioned that, because I was just talking about that with somebody just last night on that entire thing, and this was someone I haven't seen for a couple weeks, so we were just kind of catching up on things, because he didn't really get the full news of what happened, and then after I explained everything that occurred, he kind of said something very much like what you just said, so that's kind of ironic.
good advice or good comment then.
Yeah, definitely.
Grapevines think alike. So, but I mean, it is true. Anytime that you have something that can affect, and yours was within your head, okay, and anything that you have, anytime that you have stuff happen that's shifting parameters, as it were, it really can. You can find that you're much more knowledgeable about things that weren't normal for
Yes,
you. So that I'm going to be interested if you come across something like that, because you're so interested in that side of the world anyway. To get to play in it would be interesting for you.
absolutely, absolutely.
So, well, I want to talk because you do almost every convention that you can possibly manage to get to. You have for forever, right? For years and years. And you're an investigator in your own right. You're pretty amazing. You you like I said, you host shows, you guest on shows, you co-host on shows, you have been doing this forever and ever. And I know that you've been on with me and we have talked about some of this stuff before, but for people that don't know you, why? Why the paranormal? Why is this a fascination for you? Why is this your color Kool-Aid? And by the way, colors, I have a new friend because Al Leon got called back to the home planet. So we've got a new bud. He hasn't told me his name yet. But anyway, so what is your motivation? What got you fascinated by the paranormal? Because not everybody's heard you yet.
So I know, and I know I've talked about this before. I know, like, for the most part, like for a lot of those who've gone into the paranormal field, it's usually because, most of the time you usually hear it because they had an experience or something
Mhm.
when they were a young child. But that wasn't really the case for me. It was kind of more with curiosity. And when I was, even before I officially got started, it did kind of have its origins even prior to that, because for starters, even though I was a little bit young to watch this when this used to air on TV, was I used to watch the X-Files, growing
Yeah.
up in the 90s. And that during that period, that was when the show was still relatively brand new, and of course particularly popular with everyone else,
Mhm.
which also got me inspired getting involved with horror movies too. So, but it really wasn't until I was about 12 years old where I started watching kind of like a lot of the old paranormal shows that used to air on Travel Channel
Mhm.
back when they used to only air on Friday nights, not like
Yes.
what they do now, like every day. So, but I think that's what also kind of drew me to a lot of the not just on the paranormal side of things, but also kind of with history.
Mhm.
So I think that was just really something that just drew me in, that really wanted me to just think to myself, I don't know what it is, but I just really want to get involved with this kind of stuff. There's just, and of course, even still, to this day, I still don't have a full answer, but there was definitely something that kind of brought me into this, that really wanted me to get, involved with this in one way or another. Even if it was going to take a number of years for me to do so, it wasn't going to stop from my interest. See, and
Right.
typical of, like, because again, when I started doing this at age 12, I was still obviously I was still just a kid then. And because I would always talk about a lot of the stuff wherever I
Right.
went, including like when I was at school, and a lot of, I can't tell you how many times I would always get complaints from, like, teachers or parents and stuff, that they would always come up to me a lot. It's because it wasn't as accepted,
That's
like
true.
is
Yeah.
now. So I had a lot of people coming up, and there were times where they were like saying, you need to keep your mouth shut on this kind of stuff. You need to stop talking about it. But even at the age of 12 or 13, I was like, no,
People
I
actually told you to stop talking about it?
yeah, I had, there was either they didn't believe me, or that they really truly thought I was making this stuff up, or that I was trying to freak out everybody. And even at a young age, again, there were times in which I really wanted to prove them all wrong,
Sure.
what's really out there. So there was no way that, despite sometimes that there might have been a couple arguments in between, I still never gave up the interest, because this was something I really wanted to pursue.
Well, sure. I mean, once that bug bites you, you don't really walk away from that. I mean, it does. It gets you involved, and it's a great hobby, but it's almost addictive. And I think that's the nature of the paranormal, because if you are drawn into it, it has you. I mean, not in a negative way, but there's some people that just seem to be pulled, right?
Yes. Yeah, it was almost like it was that kind of situation in which, once I knew I was, kind of stepping into this uh, point of interest, I knew that there was kind of, not necessarily, but kind of like in a way, that there was no turning back,
Hmm.
especially when I had the perfect opportunities to finally go on some of my first, well, they were just part-time investigations at age 14.
Right.
So that was a pretty big ordeal for me. But at the same time, I knew then, kind of the risks that I was taking, or, because some people always look at, especially those who are just getting involved in the field, sometimes they also look at the wrong way. Like, it's not like what you see on television or anything like that, that things aren't going to
Yes.
happen so quickly as you want them to occur.
Sometimes they do. I mean,
Sometimes, yes.
I think it depends on your intent. And it also, you have to remember that we don't have teams of camera people in every area of wherever we are, right?
Very much
Filming for
so.
us, so that, if they see something happen, they can get us right over there. I mean, and they've got the footage of where it happened too. So, it's you have to know that spirit usually get back what you put in. If there's something there, right, then you stand a good chance of interacting if you are who they want to talk to.
That's kind
So,
of how I see it a lot with, because again, few years after I started getting involved with these investigations, and I know I've talked about this before, was when I had the opportunity of investigating Waverly Hills Sanatorium in
mhm,
Louisville, Kentucky. Again, and only just 17 years old at that time,
yeah.
and obviously I didn't know what to expect when I went, but it just felt like as if the stage was all set up for me that night when I went. It was almost as if a lot of these spirits throughout the building, it's like, because I had said for several months that I was, I was really starting, I was starting to believe in a lot of this kind of stuff, but it was like, but I was really hoping that in order for me to become a full believer, I needed to have like a real experience. And I'm not talking just a certain noise or like a shadow or something. I was still hoping to have that full body apparition.
Did you set parameters for your ghosts?
No, not. I mean, it was again. I was only 17 at that time,
Yeah.
so I was. That's just what I was thinking. But when I went there, it was again. It was almost as if this wish was granted because there was so much activity that occurred that night when I was at Waverly, and that literally forever changed my view into like kind of almost everything, especially with when I start, when I seen a lot of different things that occurred. And I was also fortunate to have captured a lot of this on tape, which
Oh,
to
wow.
this
That is
day,
fortunate.
yeah, well, and to this day, I actually called the Lost Paranormal tape because we only ever reviewed probably about 10% of that footage because I don't think we saw that footage until about a year afterwards. And this we were using an old fashioned video camera at that time, so this was still
Oh,
at a
wow.
time. Yeah, we
Like
didn't.
a tape one, like a reel to reel.
Yeah, it was
Were
like
you really? Oh
yeah, it
my
was like one
gosh.
of those old fashioned cameras from like the late '80s, early '90s that you still had to put a cassette tape in,
Yeah.
and
Wow, that's old
although
school.
yeah, although fortunately though it did have night vision to it, so that was at least a plus. And of course, unfortunately, no one really uses them anymore. We all use these, to film.
Sure.
Well, unfortunately, we don't really have. Either we used to have it, or we just haven't been able to find it. We don't really have one of those old players anymore. We could really play the tape over that we could watch, on the TV or whatnot. So to this day, we still don't know what may have been on the rest of that tape. So that's why I call it the Lost Paranormal tape. But if ever given the chance of having, I know we have it somewhere. If given the chance of getting that tape, and if we're able to transfer it, you know,
Hmm.
onto a
Yeah,
as a
digitalize
digital
that
video,
baby.
yeah. If I did in fact capture anything extraordinary, my hope is, again, I don't know exactly when that's going to happen anytime soon until we figure out a way. My hope is actually trying to include that footage to eventually make some documentary out of it because especially at that, there's not very many. I mean, at least as far as I know, there's not very many paranormal investigation footages out there that especially is just starting, that is filmed by an up and coming
Yeah.
17-year-old at such a notorious location. And I've been really thinking about it for these last couple of years. I thought to myself, you know what? That would actually be great if I was able to make some documentary out of it where I kind of talk about my experiences when I was there at that time, but also like with a lot of these podcasts, talk about how in a way that I kind of climbed through the ranks of
Yeah.
how I got involved in this field. And I think it would be really cool to see it as a documentary, if it ever gets made.
Well, I know we have a place here in one of our little outskirt towns, Birmingham, and I'm sure that if we've got it, then you probably do. But we have a company here, just a little mom and pop looking place. I haven't been in there, but they digitize VCR recordings
Oh,
or
that would be
VHS
great.
recordings. So I'm sure you probably have somebody that can help you with that, because wouldn't that be cool?
I've always been confident that there's got to, because Chicago probably has something like that too. I've always been saying there's got to be someone out there, but the first thing we got to do is try and find the tape because
That
I
would
know
help.
yeah, I know
That would
it's somewhere in the
definitely make
collection.
a big difference.
Yeah, I know it's somewhere in the collections we got. We just haven't had the chance to do so, but very soon. I've already told myself that we're not going to forget this. You know,
Mm-mm.
this will eventually be recovered. We'll be able to digitize it, and hopefully, I can finally see what the rest of that footage has more to offer. Because I'm really curious. And again, if I did capture something, that would be phenomenal for
That
myself.
would be phenomenal. You know, I've never been to Waverly, and I have, yeah, I've been to and through Louisville, because I've done a couple events there, and I go through there on my way to other places too. But it's really some people that are planning to go in March, reached out to me and said, "Would you like to do this?" Well, I'm just like, "Well, yeah." I mean, there's no doubt in my mind that I would like to do this. So I'm hoping that that's going to wind up being something that works out, because it's so hard to get in. And I'm I would leap at the opportunity, and I like the people that invited me. So I've investigated with them in their home location. So I think that would be fun to investigate with them in one of the American locations. So I hope that works out.
I can certainly tell you, like with Waverly, that it doesn't disappoint. I mean, there's always something that occurs at that place. I've been there twice now. Obviously, back in 2010, then I had another opportunity to go back
Oh,
3 years
cool.
ago, and I still recall when I went three years ago. For starters, I was absolutely amazed with how much a lot of the building had really been fixed up because when I went back in 2010, yeah, as you can imagine, the building, the building for the most part was still in. I mean, it was. I'm sure it was even then in better shape, but a lot of parts of the building was still relative. There was like dust all over the place. There was like parts of the ceiling that was falling.
Oh, those are scary when they're like that.
Yeah, they are. And the staircases. I mean, not even joking. Like even the staircases were broken, so you couldn't even like walk. You couldn't walk down without literally falling down several feet. And when I went back in 2021, I couldn't believe it. Like everything had been like repaired. Like a lot of the broken
Wow.
down ceilings were taken down and replaced with new ones. The stairways were now accessible. A lot of the hallways and rooms were now cleaned up of all the dust. There were new windows that were put in. I mean, I was just I think I had to take a minute to really kind of think this over because to me, seeing how much repair has been done to this building, I literally had to take a minute to think to myself, like,
Wow.
is this like, do they really clean a lot of this up? I couldn't believe it. And in both cases, it was just such an unbelievable feeling because I had to take like another minute just really thinking to myself, like, am I really seeing this?
I know. And it's so special. A lot of people buy things and just leave them to go to ruin, and just, charge out the foot for people to go in there, and then just pocket the money. They don't reinvest it back into their property. And we've both been places like that.
Yeah.
But when you go someplace like you're describing here, and like my friend Shelley with her old Paulding Jail in Paulding, Ohio, and Ronnie D's with first Old South Pittsburgh and then the Harriman Hospital in Tennessee. Also, you find somebody who takes these iconic, beautifully haunted locations. And I do mean beautifully haunted, because when a spirit is trying to communicate with you, that is such a gift. And so they're living in these places that they loved, or they wouldn't still be there. And they're just rack and ruin. They're terrible. And I found that with specifically Old South Pittsburgh, I was investigating there with my friend Lori, and we had the building to ourselves, and we were just sitting by the nurse's station, and there we weren't paying attention because we were taking a break, right? And we were messing with equipment, and there was a balloon that was coming against a fan, okay? And it would get up to the fan, and then it would like try to hold its on and go by, and it would come, and it kept doing that. It made a big circle, and I was like, it took me a minute, right? I wasn't paying attention, but Lori was. She's in chat now. I'm sure she's got something to say about that. But it was so funny because she just like waited on me to notice it, and because I'm messing with the camera, right? And I saw it, and I was like, what is happening? She was like, it's been doing that. And I'm like, this what? So, and I have footage of it. So I'm just like, okay. But I've gotten a lot of random stuff in Old South Pittsburgh, like walking through there outside, and, as they were this team that Ronnie put together that saved this hospital. He bought it at auction as it was about to be torn down. It's a really great story and a really great man. But it was so weird because I will play back a recorder, just whatever, and there'll be people talking to me, and I'm just like, I'm not even holding up my end of the conversation because I'm not hearing them. I'm just like, I'm sorry. I really talk well most of the time. But, do you ever feel like sometimes Lori said she knew I would notice. She's right, I did. But, do you ever find when you go back and review your evidence that you totally missed a conversation somebody was trying to have with you?
I actually do. There is really one particular investigation that I often do think about. This was a couple years ago, back in 2017, and I will admit I don't, because obviously it was one of the few times that I did this. Normally I wouldn't, but to be perfectly honest, well, it wasn't just me. My dad was involved also. But
I'm afraid to ask what this is.
Well, no, we kind of trespassed on location. It was.
I didn't hear that. Okay.
Yeah. Well, it's on Facebook Live too, so it's kind of already out there, and it's been a couple years now, so I think the statute of limitations has expired.
Good enough. Perfect. Because we don't want them yet, man.
Yeah, we went to this. Well, for starters, my dad and I, we used to always go to this area in Indiana, in a town called Rockville. We don't really go there anymore because of a lot of where we went. There's been a lot of different changes lately, but it was in the town of Rockville. They actually have something called the Covered Bridge Festival, which, Indiana is known for so many covered bridges, and where Rockville is located, it's in a town called Park County, which that county alone has like over 20 covered bridges, which one of them is said to be, one of which is said to be haunted, which I did invest again, going back to my early days when I was, doing part-time investigations. Mm-hmm. I actually did investigate that bridge. I think it was called the Sim Smith Covered Bridge. I might have that name wrong. It's been quite a while since I've looked it up. But so in Park County is actually, because they have so many of them in that county alone, it's actually called the Covered Bridge Capital of the World. Oh, and wow. So they have they actually have this festival to honor not only just the bridges that are still in existence, but also those that sadly have been lost to time. Oh. So they usually have it during the fall, almost every October. But there was one of the last times that we did go, my dad happened to find, not necessarily in this case with any of the covered bridges, but we found this building that we've never really seen quite before. Now, for starters, I actually thought, years later, I thought this was Indiana State Sanatorium that a lot of people have been talking about. But then I found out this was not Indiana State. It was a different facility, if you will. This was actually called the Park County Mental Institution.
Oh, okay.
we thought that was kind of odd because we have driven past that. For starters, my dad, I mean, even though he doesn't go there anymore, he's been going down to that area of Indiana since 1975. So he had been going through that area for, well over 40 years prior before we stopped going. And of course, I'd been going since I'd been a young kid. So we never noticed this building. So we decided to kind of take, take our curiosity and try to see what this building was. And that's when we found this old mental institution. And when we got there, I think I already kind of had the expectation. First, it turned out it was built in the early 30s, but you could clearly tell it had been long abandoned for years. I mean, unfortunately, like how you just described it, it probably was kind of a beautiful building to begin with. It was almost in shambles. It obviously had been exposed to the elements, so there was plant life all over the place. And again, even though we kind of trespassed, at least I was with my dad in this case. So we decided to go in, and my dad, again, I am one of those investigators who would never trespass, but I think we took the opportunity to go because we thought, well, yes, it's not really the right thing to do, but I think because the Covered Bridge Festival was going on, that I think a lot of the law enforcement agencies were kind of more focused on the festival. So that's why we didn't.
Yeah, we're just going to go in now because they're busy. Yeah.
Yeah, that's why we kind of took the opportunity. We still decided to go in again. We were just exploring, but
sure, yeah.
But the funniest thing was, not long after we arrived, and this is what I've not reviewed the footage since I shot it all live on Facebook because I'm kind of afraid of what I'm going to find and not necessarily paranormal wise, because a few minutes after we arrived at this former mental institution, and it was a pretty small building. This wasn't like a giant building or anything like that.
Okay.
Suddenly, this car pulls up, and we first saw it originally thinking, okay, it's probably one of the officers or something, but we didn't see any lights or anything. And this woman comes out, obviously somebody that we've never seen before. I don't know if she somehow saw us or she just came out on her own accord, but I guess she decided to come check out the building herself. And I'm going to be completely honest, she was probably one of the strangest people I think I ever met in my entire life, because when I was trying to go through doing this live on Facebook, to see if maybe I could get, if anything would appear on camera or whatever, because I didn't have my equipment with, kind of, filming it live was all I really had.
Mm-hmm.
She was just like making all these weird noises and stuff like that. I don't remember exactly. She was. It was just like, okay, like this, I don't know who she is, but she's making all. I didn't want to say it, of course, like on camera, because I didn't want her to hear me or anything like that. But in my head, I was thinking that way. But that's why I'm kind of afraid of reviewing the footage, because you talk about if there was some kind of conversation with spirits. Well, I might have missed that opportunity and probably never really knew about it, because this woman was kind of in the way, like acting so weird or something.
What kind of noises was she making, Nick?
I don't. I honestly don't remember, because was like, I think she was like trying to make. I don't know if it was like trying to make trying to think this was all spooky, like trying to make all these noises or whatever. It was just the weirdest thing. And there were times, like if you watch the video, that I actually do try to get away from her so I could have a more quiet session at this building. And also too, when we went, we didn't go at night. We went during the day, obviously.
Yeah.
But it was like this woman just would not stop following me. It was so weird with this person. Like, I just really wanted to say to her, can I have a few minutes to myself, please? I didn't.
Well, I'm trespassing in your building. Did you get the impression that she was like, that she had ownership of the building and she was there?
No, my dad and we kind of had that feeling that, no, I don't think she has any ownership to the building. I mean, I think she just came out just to see what this building was like.
And so she was just there checking it out too.
I think, yeah, because that's what we were just doing for the most part, checking it out. Because ironically enough, when we were actually at the festival itself in downtown Rockville, or wait, no, let me take that back. That was afterwards. We did manage to talk with a local historian, and she gave us a lot more information on the building, because surprisingly, this was not. I mean, I'm sure now there's probably a lot more available, but at the time there wasn't a lot of information that I could really history information that I could
Right.
really find about this place online. So we had to go to the historical society to get more answers on it. But now it seems like it's really kind of gotten a lot more attention, because probably about 2 or 3 years later, it was featured on a local news station, which I think you could find the video now on YouTube. I think they put it on their YouTube channel. And funny enough, they interviewed the very same historian that we talked
I
about
thought you
it.
were going to say the lady.
Yeah, no,
I thought you were going
thank
to say
God
they
it
interviewed the
wasn't her.
lady.
That would have been disastrous.
That would have been hilarious.
It would have been funny at the same time, but
Yeah.
it was just. But regardless of the fact, it was unfortunate to see that the building was just in terrible shambles. Like, in addition to all the plant life, like when we went into the actual building itself, like you would expect, there was graffiti in some areas. Parts
Yeah.
parts of the roof and ceiling had caved in. There was like either bird or bat feces on the top floor, like I think it was supposed to be the attic. And there was even, I think it was some kind of basement that it had that, I mean, I'm sure they probably fixed it by now, but at the time there was literally like a pipe or water line that was broken, and water was filling into one particular room.
Oh,
And
wow.
I actually thought, I even told my dad at the time, I mean, like when we were there, that, you know what, maybe we should tell someone that there's a water line broken, because I was not only concerned with flooding, but that's not good that all this water was just going out of control.
Yeah.
And that's something I've never really seen at such locations like that before. So there was definitely a lot of concern with this building, in its poor state. And as far as I know, even though they've probably repaired the pipe now since, I got a feeling that this mental institution is still in really bad shape. I mean, sadly, there have been talks of wanting to tear it down, because again, it's in such poor shape. But a lot of the other people throughout Rockville, as well as several of the other communities, they have been trying to save the building, because like any location like this, it serves as part of the town's history. And
Well,
yeah,
go
go ahead.
ahead.
Yeah.
Well, I was going to say that I interviewed Austin Maynard. I think it was Austin Maynard. I get Austin's confused. The place that you mentioned earlier in Indiana.
Yes.
He is part of a group that takes on facilities like that. The gentleman, and it's something that might be somebody to reach out to, because Madison Infirmary is that person, that group.
Okay.
And I know that they have a really good con every year. And so I think that would be somebody you might want to reach out to about that Park County facility. Just
Yeah.
throwing it out there. I mean, it's none of my business or anything else, but from what I understand, there's kind of a conglomerate of people that have come together to save these places.
Well, to
And
be
that might
honest,
be,
that's something I've been wanting to be a part of, to save a lot of these buildings. And it's not just the haunted locations, even those that just have, history to them, is what I desperately want to say. Oh, there's Tom McNicholas. Good to see you, Tom.
yeah.
But what actually really got me started in really wanting to save such locations like that was not only just that location I went to back in 2017. There was another location that we have here, well, not anywhere close to me, but down in southern Illinois. And it's Tom, actually, since Tom's here, I've told him about this. And actually, Chris was watching, I was just telling him about this last night. We have it's actually a prison, but the prison, unfortunately, to this day is still in operation. It's called which is called Menard Correctional Center. and
It's
which is
called what correctional center?
Menard Correctional Center,
Oh, okay.
and which is located in Chester, Illinois. It's literally right on the Mississippi River. It's the prison is literally like right across the street from the Mississippi River.
Oh, okay.
And Menard Correctional Center, to start, just to give a little quick history on it, what for starters, it's the second oldest operating prison in the state of Illinois. It was originally built back in 1878, which, like a lot of prisons at that time, was built with inmate labor. So a lot of the
Mhm.
inmates built this place. Although construction of this prison wasn't fully completed until 1889. And and again, the prison is still in operation, but they've still managed to maintain it. But the sad part, however, of this place, well, and also in addition, it's also Illinois' largest maximum security prison. So most likely, there's a chance that I don't think it's going to be closing anytime soon.
Right.
No, it's not the one that we rushed the gates to. Tom, that was further. This was further downstate. We've never gone to this one.
I can just see y'all. I'm sorry. That's funny. Because I know both of you.
Yeah. Well, what's so fascinating about Menard Correctional Center, if you look it up, is that it really did have that, even though it's still in operation, it still had a very historical look to it. Because when you look at pictures of this prison, it had kind of this, almost like this array of, like, it had these two stone lions out front of the building. It had skeleton keys. It had a scale of justice. One person actually had described the prison almost looking more like an ornate university than a maximum security facility. I mean,
Wow.
and honestly, I look at it, it kind of looked almost more like a library. I mean, even though it's a maximum security prison, which in fact, that was one of the facilities in which serial killer John Wayne Gacy had served time in. It's despite that. So in other words, in spite that you had some of the most dangerous inmates, serving time there in the state of Illinois, it was actually quite a beautiful building. And I always thought to myself, man, if that place ever closes, I would love to try to investigate it if ever given the chance. It actually kind of looks a little similar in appearance, like the way how it was built, kind of similar to Joliet Prison. That's more closer to me.
Oh, okay. Yeah.
But the sad part about this place was that, and this again happened around the same time when Joliet was starting to open for tours and investigations. But around the time that we started helping out with the tours and investigations, I actually was showing one of the tour guides of Menard Correctional Center, and what I saw next, I did not even see this coming, because I didn't get any word about this whatsoever. I had found out that tragically that they had torn down the administration building of Menard Correctional Center, which that was like the main part of the prison, like the main feature, like you would see if you look it up. And also one other thing about this prison, I don't know if I think it was featured, I believe I don't know if it was actually featured in a movie or if it was at least mentioned, but supposedly they said it was also featured in the movie The Fugitive with Harrison Ford back in the early 90s.
Okay.
So it got some notoriety too through film, but I haven't seen the movie yet, but I don't know if it was actually featured in it. But anyways, I found out that the administration building, the reason why they tore it down was it was just not being used anymore. The rest of the facility was still being, used, but they weren't using the administration, and they just decided, without any announcement whatsoever, to just tear down the administration building. And when I looked more this up, once again, they had pictures of the demolition of this prison, and I was just like, I was almost as heartbroken as if someone had passed away. Like, what the hell? Like, it was just like, it was and the building was still in great shape. Like, it just didn't make any sense whatsoever.
That doesn't make any sense. And I don't understand why they would have done that. I mean, if they weren't using it, then it wasn't costing them any money.
Well, and I also decided to look because these pictures were also later posted on like an official page on Facebook. And it wasn't just myself, of course, that was heartbroken by. I mean, a lot of the people of Chester were shocked because, again, nobody ever got word about this demolition. So nobody saw this coming. And a lot of people in Chester were not happy that they tore down this building because, again, even though this was still an active prison, it still represented part of the town's history. And I thought, the least they could have done was, I understand the rest of the prison is still in use. I get that. But the least they could have done was they could have fenced off the administration building, the rest of the facility, like with a high security fence, and they could have opened that up as a museum. Like they could have made that the prison museum that could have talked a lot
Or
about.
could have been a fundraiser.
Yeah, could have
been a money-making possibility.
If we knew that the administration building was in danger of, being torn down,
Sure.
I would have somehow interfered to save that place and try to get others to help out too, because this was just, I don't know what it was, but there was just something so fast. I kind of consider it Southern Illinois' version of Joliet Prison. So, and you go there now, the only thing that's basically left, like where the administration building was, there was like nothing but space. In between that, you had east and west wings, and now they're just separated on their, by themselves.
That's like taking out the center of Mansfield.
It very much was. That's kind of how I've been comparing it. It's very much like Mansfield in this case.
Well, because it sounds like the setup was similar. You've got, the cell blocks, and then you've got the intake between them, and the chapel and stuff. And how tragic.
It really is. And you also have to think too, like, it was literally torn down, literally 140 years after it was first built. From 18.
It was 140 years old.
Yeah, from 1878.
And they just ripped it.
Yeah, from 1878 until 2018. 2018 was when they tore down the administration building. And like I said, what really hurts me the most, more than anything else, is that, like I said earlier, this was built with inmate labor. Mm-hmm. Yes, it was a place, like any other prison out there. This was a place of punishment. This was a location that inmates were there because they had committed crimes and they needed to serve their sentences.
That's why it's a prison. Yeah.
Yeah, like I get the understanding of it, but you got to give credit to the inmates, regardless, that they literally built this place with the sweat of their own two hands. And for just seeing these demolition companies just tear it down 140 years later, I mean, most likely, I'm sure this prison is haunted. I would guarantee that any inmates that are still remaining at this place, even after they've long passed away, including the inmates that built this facility, I mean, they got to be absolutely rolling in their graves and just so angry that, it's like, yeah, we were here to serve our time, but we went through all this trouble building.
But look what we made, and you just destroyed it. I mean, I think that's what causes some places to be haunted. Well, I mean, you disrespected this. I mean, and especially these were people that, they were criminals or what, but not everybody who was serving time in that kind of facility is a hardened criminal. Okay. And so it just was like, I would be offended if I were a spirit and something I worked that hard on was just gone.
Well, not to mention, when you think about it, you may have also had inmates that, had, the early inmates that served there. Some of them were there maybe just doing a 1 or 2 year term, that they were eventually allowed to go home and be,
sure.
Be
Not
back.
Everybody's a death row inmate.
Exactly. So the fact that during that time they probably helped build this facility and just see it tear down, it's like you have to think to yourself too that, yeah, they were criminals, but they built this facility to keep, far more worse criminals, years down the road, keep them away from the rest of society. So it's like they built this place in the end to keep society safe. And to see what this building that they spent so much time on, probably, building it during the hottest and coldest times of the year. Again, if I was an inmate myself serving time, and even if I got out and if I died many years later, and just seeing something that I helped build, I'd probably be pretty angry myself that we went through all this trouble.
It doesn't really, I mean, all of that aside, if they're still housing inmates, it doesn't make sense not to have an administration building. I mean,
exactly. So
who's doing
way out
all
there.
the administration and where are they? Like in the John and one of the cell block. I mean,
Yeah,
you have to have a place to do your business. Well,
yeah. As far as I
that's
know,
funny with the John part, but I didn't mean it that way. But
yeah,
you know, just you have to have a place to handle the paperwork. That's not
I
any
just
better, but we're going to leave that alone.
yeah.
But
I'm just kind of curious of how they do it now that it's gone. So they
yeah,
kind of either way they destroyed a part of history, and that's what really got me involved in wanting to save such locations because it's not the other thing that hurts a lot is that it's not just buildings that are just falling into disrepair. We're talking about buildings that are still in great shape, like in this case, Menard Correctional Center.
hmm I that really is so frustrating because we see these places that are absolutely derelict. They probably should be torn down, and yet as a community, we support them being rehabilitated. And I'm going to tell
Yes.
you, I have not seen anyone go to the extent, and I know I already said his name, but Ronnie D with both of his hospitals, I've never seen anyone. You could eat off the floors at Old South Pittsburgh. Okay, it is. You could operate in there. It's just crazy. The level of restoration that he has put into both of these facilities, and I'm so I'm always so shocked when people don't. Shelley Robertson at the old Paulding Jail, she has put central heat and air in there because, except for in the cell blocks where there's no glass in the windows because they still have the bars as they always did. But, you know, she has set the kitchen up so that she can cook for, if you have events, there's refrigerators and stuff there. I mean, these people that have these buildings that are just some of the best haunted locations on the planet, both also Pittsburgh and Paulding. I will stand by the fact that if you go, you're going to get evidence unless you're really doing something wrong. I mean, they're great locations that somebody stepped in to save because Paulding Jail was going to be probably torn down. It was being sold at auction, and it's just crazy that
Yeah.
there's all these places, and both of those people stepped in with some heavy commitment to do that.
Well, and it's
And
even worse when they don't even make any announcements in this case. Like in this case
that
with
was unbelievable.
yeah. In fact, if you don't mind, I actually do have a photo if you want to check
I
it
would
out.
love that.
I
Please.
actually have a few pictures of what the I have of what it looked like when it was when the administration building was still standing. So here is an actual photo of Menard Correctional Center. Now, can you see the
Oh,
screen?
okay.
Yeah, and as you can see, it kind of it has quite an interesting structure to it. Here's one of the stone lions that I was talking about.
Yeah. That's
So,
beautiful, actually.
yeah, it's quite a beautiful building. Despite that, again, some people find it hard to believe that this is an actual prison. So and right here on the top of the front of the building is the scale. I don't think you could really see the skeleton keys in this case, but it just has a very interesting structure to it. But now, unfortunately, I think this is the next one. Unfortunately, this is when it was demolished. You see that next picture?
Not yet.
Okay, hold on 1 second. I might have to reshare it again. Give me 1 second here while I'm getting it. Okay, here we go. Unfortunately, this is when they demolished it unannounced.
Good heavens.
Yeah, it was such a terrible waste.
Oh my gosh. And they couldn't even get the appropriate sized equipment to do a good job with that. That's terrible.
It's awful. It really is.
I can't believe that they just went in like that. That's
I
tragic.
it's tragic, and like I said, I mean, even actually, you can even see right here, like on the side here, there's a fence along the
hmm
line here of the prison. I mean, if they really wanted to kind of upgrade their security, they could have added more fences and saved this facility and open this up as the prison museum.
hmm And
And then
made money.
yeah, And I got one final picture. I can only get this from Google search. And this is what it looks like today. I mean, not much has changed, but you'll see immediately that there's this
Okay.
there's this big space in between what it looks like now. Sorry, the picture is a little bit small, but right here is where the building was, and now it's gone.
I have glasses somewhere. Okay. Let me put my specs on. Oh my gosh. What is that's ridiculous.
It really is. It really is. So that's going to be something that's truly going to be missed.
So I want to know what Tom's talking about when he said just don't rush the gates.
Don't
That
rush
makes
the
you
gates.
really nervous.
I know exactly what he's talking about. So ironically, that happened that same year, 2018. So Tom and I, we were going down to Peoria, and which is this case is down in central Illinois.
Mhm.
And there, when we were driving, we it wasn't necessarily a Paracon that we were helping. We were doing this time. We were actually helping out with a movie festival that was going on. But along the way, we went to we actually found two prisons. One was an abandoned one, which was no longer being used. The other one is also still in operation. The first one was called Dwight Correctional Center. And again, another historic prison. It was built in 1930. And that was, I think that was one of the first maximum security prisons to house female inmates at that time. The prison no longer is in operation. It closed down in 2013. But I know that I know it's being used I think it's being used like as a training center for like law enforcement, firefighting, that kind of stuff. But we drove through it just for a few minutes just to kind of check out the prison. But that at that time they didn't have as much security as they do now, so we were fortunate. But the next prison
We're such ghost hunters.
yeah. The next prison we went to, this was the one that actually made me nervous. We drove through a town called Pontiac. And ironically, when I said that Menard Correctional Center was the second oldest operating prison, well, they have a facility of their own that's called Pontiac Correctional Center. And that, as of now, is the oldest operating prison in Illinois. That's been operating since June of 1871.
1871?
So, yeah, since then.
Wow.
And there have been talks for many years about wanting to close down the facility because, again, of the age of the prison. But unfortunately, I don't think that's going to – I mean, I got a feeling it probably will eventually close down, but not – at least not for several years, because Pontiac is pretty much one of those rural communities. So a lot of the people that live in Pontiac are corrections officers at the facility. So if they close down Pontiac – and unless they build like a new prison facility from scratch, everyone's going to be out of a job then. You know, there's only just like a few other jobs, like, you know, working at a gas station, that kind of thing. So that would really cost a lot of people's jobs if it closed down, they don't build a new facility. But anyways, we happened to be passing by Pontiac, and at first we just took some pictures of it from afar, and it's a pretty big facility. I mean, it was a lot bigger than I expected. And then Tom decided to get a little bit closer to this, and I was like, okay, well, I was like telling him, you know, just stay on the roads though, like, so we don't end up, you know, getting too close. But before I know it, Tom makes the turn, and he ends up going into the parking lot of the facility, and I'm starting to get a lot more nervous of like I wasn't afraid because of the inmates, because like any prison, we drove up. And there's a guard's watchtower in front, and I could clearly see in the windows there's a corrections officer there.
Oh.
And I just thought to myself, he's got to have a sniper rifle just ready to fire.
Just waiting on you to break somebody out.
Yeah, I think they thought we were planning some kind of prison escape. And surprisingly, I did have the quick courage to get some up close photographs of Pontiac. I was like, Tom, like, you gotta go, just go.
I would have loved to have been a fly in that car. That had to be such a hoot.
I was so nervous. Then eventually, we literally got the hell out of there. And then as we were driving further more down into downtown Pontiac, like every minute, like minute, two
You were
minutes.
looking for them, weren't you?
Yeah, I mean, I was constantly turning, by the back seat trying to see if there were any, police cars following us. But surprisingly, they never followed us. We never got pulled over.
I bet those plates got run though.
Well, I'm sure
Tom
they
said, "No
were, but
fear here."
I'm sure they saw the license plates. There were security cameras all over the place, and I actually later posted the pictures that I took. But I did tell everybody that yes, Pontiac may be a historical prison, but unless it ever closes down and becomes a museum or a location that is open for investigation, I literally said, do not go to this place. You either you will be arrested or most likely you will be shot.
Do not rush the gates.
Exactly. So although I did find out one part of the facility is now closed. So not to say that we can go yet, but it's already kind of starting the closing process.
Yeah. How big would that be compared to some place like Mansfield? Is this a small county jail or is it
Oh,
big?
it's pretty massive. I mean, I think, like as far as like width would go, I think it probably would be because again, it's been a couple of years now since we won. I mean, I think it's probably more taller than
Mm-hmm.
Mansfield. It just there were parts of it that you can kind of see the original structures, and
Mm-hmm.
it kind of almost did kind of have almost like the not just that historical aspect to it, but I think also it even kind of resembled like partially like a factory or something. It was just this massive building. But what was also different, I think, of Pontiac compared to some of the other prisons, including Mansfield, was yes, it did have like the east and west wings too, like at the front of the building.
Mm-hmm.
But I think it was probably a little bit smaller. I mean, it's hard to say, especially obviously because unlike Mansfield, where that's open to the public, you can't go to this one unless you work as a guard or you're an inmate there. So it's kind of hard to say compared to size, like if you were inside the building itself. But I think it might have been a little bit smaller than Mansfield.
Okay. Well, I know that I think Mansfield is freaking huge, and I've investigated there several times. And my friend Lori in chat was used to have her birthday parties there, and I was invited to go do those. And we've gotten some great evidence there. So it's um it's a cool place too. Tom says he loves hearing you tell the stories because he forgets most of the
Yeah,
details.
he does. I usually remember most of it.
Well, you're a good historian. I mean, you really are because you do retain so much of that information, and that's a real gift because I do not so much. More so since I've gotten old and feeble minded, as it were. But it's um it's just cool, and I know that you enjoy, you love ghost hunting. You love the locations. You love knowing the history. You're really good with your recall on these things. And so that makes for a good experience when you get to share that. And I appreciate that so much. I just love when you're a good you're a good storyteller, but you remember your facts, and that's nice. I like that.
That's kind of what inspired me to eventually make my podcast, The Nick Files. I
Mm-hmm.
decided to really expand on really kind of finding a way of how I could really tell these stories, especially if you've seen the show. I mean, it's especially on a lot of locations because there's also a lot of other locations out there, like some of the aforementioned places I just mentioned that not too many people have really heard about. And
Yes.
when I first started the Nick Files, like not surprisingly, yes, the first couple episodes I kind of focused on kind of the more famous locations, but now I've kind of been focusing on the less notorious either the less notorious locations or places that, for example, that may have once been like on the old paranormal shows, like from the late 80s,
Yeah.
90s, and early 2000s that nobody ever talks about anymore. So, because
That's
there's
a great point.
yeah,
I'm
because
sorry,
there's a lot.
but that's a great point because I go back and I watch the reruns and stuff because I like them too, right?
Yes.
And I'll see places that I will have been just around in that area because I travel to do cons and stuff, and you know there'll be places that I'm like, oh, I'll have to check that out next year. And because I go to a lot of the same cons to cover them and stuff, but it's interesting to me, and you're so good. Robert White in chat said, and you're enthusiastic about the retelling. And I love that you bring stuff that people have maybe let drop by the wayside.
Yeah,
I appreciate that.
because there's obviously a lot of locations. I mean, I haven't really done a lot yet for, like, in this case, for Alabama or even Illinois yet, because again, a lot of places I've been focusing lately with the show have actually been in Ohio, but
Mm-hmm.
I'm really trying. I mean, there's obviously thousands of different haunted and historical locations out there, and I know for a fact that because there's so many of them, and some of these places have such limited information,
Mm-hmm.
understandably, there's no way I'm not going to be able to cover every single sites
Yeah.
like that exists like worldwide. But what I can do at the very least is cover maybe at least a good majority of them. So, like in this case for you and me, like I know for a fact there's probably a lot of locations out there throughout Illinois and Alabama that probably you and I don't even know about yet.
There are. I'm
And
always surprised.
so for me to kind of bring a lot of these locations like onto Nick files in this case, I think that's really, for these locations, whether or not they're trying to look for that same type of notoriety, I guess, for lack of a better term,
Yeah.
it's always a very beneficial thing to even still talk about this place, because that, like you just said, that's just kind of, that would be a location that, if somebody lives in that particular area,
Mm-hmm.
they could say, that might be something I may want to check out, especially its history or something like that. So it's not only just a matter of me wanting to talk about these locations, it also kind of has a beneficial side to it as well.
Sure. And, I think that's so important that you do that because I'm not in your part of the world, right?
Yeah.
But I have a lot of friends up there. And so I'm not going to know just, me personally, but a lot of people like me aren't going to know that this stuff is there unless you're talking about it. And,
Yes.
so I appreciate that because I have a bucket list of things I want to go and look at. And while I do travel to other countries now, I love doing that here.
Yeah.
We've got a lot of stuff here. It's just not that old, right? But unless you start getting into the Mojave Desert and stuff like that with the
Right.
Native American
Yeah,
stuff.
and that's like
But
what Robert said. Yeah, that's the reason why I have, these ghost hunting friends worldwide, because
yeah,
I not only just focus, there have been several occasions where I have not just focused on locations, obviously, just in the United States. I do
no, you
try to
haven't. Yeah.
expand worldwide. In this case with Robert, because he lives in Australia.
Oh,
Now,
okay.
now, I haven't really covered any locations, at least not yet in Australia, but I do have several locations that I have heard about that I am interested in wanting
Hmm.
to talk about. And it's not only just the locations too, because what I've also been doing lately with Nick Files is I'm also trying to expand on, because I didn't want to just stay restricted on just haunted and
Yeah.
historical locations and events. I've also been trying to focus now more on cryptozoology, UFOs. I mean, I'm trying to do almost everything. And but hang on, hold on
Cool.
one second. Okay, all right, that's fine. Yeah, I'm on a show. Sorry, that was my mom.
No
They're going
worries.
they're going over to see my niece, which I just want to say real quick. If you didn't
Cutie
see,
patootie.
yeah, if you guys didn't see, today is her first ever birthday. So I would like to wish my niece Madeline a happy first birthday. So she's growing. She's doing great.
That one is fun. And by the way, it is my grandson, Frankie J's 6th birthday today.
Oh, how about that?
So, how about that? So,
So
great celebrations.
yeah, it really is. But anyways, yeah. So like, I have a lot of these locations out there, and well, and actually, well, I was saying, yeah. So I'm trying to do almost everything. In fact, Robert will probably like hearing this. when I do because again, when I've been starting to do the cryptozoology stuff, I mean, this probably won't be until next year, but I was supposed to do this earlier this year, but I just didn't have enough time to do so, sadly. So I've already kind of rescheduled this for next year in September and October. But starting in September and October is when I've kind of been doing a lot of the more cryptid related stuff. I've kind of been looking at, I kind of see it as almost like the, even though it's still even if it's several weeks away, I consider it almost like my Halloween specials that I do, because I'm going on I'm taking my show on a different direction. And when I started doing like the cryptid slideshows, I mean, at first I started, again, not too many people know this. Illinois actually does have their own, we do have our own cryptids. So I started off with those. I wanted to start off with the local cryptids before I started expanding to kind of the more well-known ones. And I haven't made the slideshows yet, but I do have a list of all these different cryptids that I want to cover. And one of them is, this is what I was going to say for Robert, he'll like hearing this. One of them is from Australia. And this is one that probably not like for us over here in the U.S., we probably may have not heard of. Robert may have heard of this one, though, because, again, this is an Australian cryptid. There's one that I would like to cover eventually, something called the Megalania, or
the Megalania,
or Devil Dragon. It was once featured on one of the old paranormal shows, although they already admitted that this was just like one of those kind of found footage type of shows. It was featured on, I don't know if you remember that show, Lost Tapes.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know.
Yeah,
they did an episode on it. So Megalania, long story short, that was the world's largest monitor lizard that ever existed. I sometimes call it the last living dinosaur, because it literally looked like a dinosaur. And
monitor lizards are scary.
Yeah,
I'm sorry, and they're poisonous.
Yeah, so. Well, what Megalania was, like I said, it was the, like I said, largest monitor lizard that ever lived, and that primarily lived obviously in Australia. And what's kind of ironic was it did have a similar appearance. I mean, a lot of scientists and cryptozoologists have said they've noted a close relationship between Megalania and the modern day Komodo dragon, although the Komodo dragon is not native to Australia. But like the Komodo dragon, the Megalania may have attacked humans, but given its greater size, it would have been far more lethal. So, like, you look at a modern day Komodo dragon, which is like, they usually get up to about 10 to 15 feet long. Well, imagine the Megalania being almost twice that big. That was rumored to be about 20 to 30 feet long.
Get out.
Yeah, so almost like the size of a school bus, almost. And
my gosh.
And believe it or not, although, and they say to this day that it's still, some cryptozoologists believe that it still hunts in the Australian rainforest and grasslands. And considering at the time that it existed, like I said, like the Komodo dragon may have attacked humans, they say while it is now considered extinct, despite the massive amount of sightings and reports that are still going on to this day, it surely did encounter humans when the early Aboriginal settlers arrived on Australian soil more than 140 to 150,000 years ago. So it would have shared that same land with humans.
Snacks.
So yeah, it would have. The sight of that, I mean, I just think about, just the sight of what it must have been like for these early Aboriginal settlers that lived there, that arrived, it must have been terrifying for them. So I've really been kind of more focusing on a lot of the reports of these supposed sightings of this creature. There was actually one report where a farmer, in fact, because Robert, where he lives in the state of Queensland in Australia. I'm sure he'll be interested in hearing this. There was actually several years ago, a farmer in Queensland did find bones that he did believe that he really was determined had belonged to a Megalania. Although after when he sent them to forensic science, they did say that the bones, however, were only 300 years old. But that might also contribute to a lot of the other reports and sightings of supposedly the Megalania. So there's still a lot of sightings of this giant lizard in that part of Australia to this day.
Is that a populated area?
No, it's well, Robert could probably answer that question. I mean, question since he lives in Queensland, but in a lot of the areas where these reports are, no, there's very few people that live in that area because it's mostly rainforest and grassland. So it's a pretty rural area of of Australia. And if that's
Okay.
not showing, if that's not showing enough, this might also contribute to the sightings. Of course, obviously, there's no physical evidence to really show this, but chillingly, bushwalkers often frequently go missing in the Australian rainforest. And on one occasion, in September of 2008, a video camera, sandal, and I forgot what the third item was that were reported to belong to a missing hiker were found on a riverbed in North Queensland. And even more strangely, tracks of an unidentified animal were discovered nearby. So, and they never did say what may have been on that camera. So they never did find the person,
That's
sadly.
crazy.
So that's the other thing too, is that if I was given the opportunity, because again, I've done some cryptid hunts, if I was given the opportunity in this case to like investigate megalania, ever given the chance to go into Australia, I would definitely want to go with a group. No way I'd want to take the risk.
Not solo.
Yeah.
Definitely not solo. Well, that's how I feel about most cryptids. Okay, because um, you know, Bigfoot, they're not pets.
No, they're not.
People act like, oh well, we're going on a Bigfoot hunt, and I'm just like, you got weaponry, right? I mean, because you got to have big weaponry, but this isn't your pet that you're going to love and pet and stroke and call George, right?
Yeah.
I mean, despite Harry with the Hendersons, okay, but this is, oh, there you go.
Up, yep,
Carl
there's
is so cool. Look at Carl pulling that up. Holy cow.
yeah, that's what that once existed on Australian land. So
No,
just kind of do the math of like comparing height to like for a person, and then you see something like this, and especially if you encounter something like that, I mean, you're
that is a
definitely
big no.
what's even worse is probably much like the Komodo dragon. It's also believed that the megalania may have had the poisonous glands
Hmm.
that they used to kill prey, and it was also believed too that much like like other monitor lizards, the megalania may have stalked its prey for hours, even days, before before attacking, like killing its prey, and it would eventually go in for the kill. So this, if
Well,
you
and you wouldn't
encounter,
be able to hide from it because they climb.
no, you well, I don't know if the megalania was known to actually have climbed, because obviously it was much larger size than the Komodo dragon. But if you were to encounter this thing, and especially if you got bit by this creature, like, and managed to survive, there was no escape, because this thing was now stalking you.
Yeah.
It has a taste of your blood, and all I can say is that if you're by yourself and if you get stalked, much like in this Lost Tapes episode, even though it was fake, still I would just say, hope you had a good life.
Yeah. And Robert says, yeah, that versus the Crocs.
Yeah.
Yeah, not something you want to encounter. And I'm not
Yep. There's the
interested.
size comparison.
Oh, good job, Carl. Carl is so resourceful.
Yeah. Yeah. It's huge. It was a massive creature.
That's a big no. That's a big nope. Nope. All day long. Not even touching that.
Robert said he may have not heard of it. He confused it with the rainbow serpent. I don't think it's the same thing, but yeah, but that will be something I'll be talking eventually, Robert, on Nick Files.
You have the coolest shows. But when you do set out to go research these cryptids, especially the North American stuff, that's going to be interesting because there are so many more than what we are aware of as a rule. You get you've got Bigfoot and you've got um oh my,
Mothman. And of course,
you've got Mothman.
What Tom said, not another not as big, well known, we have the melon heads too.
Yeah. I just love Tom. He's never, ever, ever not put something good in chat. So I love that. Well, what are you going to do with the melon head?
Well, with melon heads, I mean, I guess I'll throw this. I probably said this before, but I'll repeat it anyway because I know not everybody's heard of them. So that's kind of another least known cryptid. They're actually described as these humanoid beings with large bulbous heads that occasionally emerge from their hiding places to attack people. And so again, that was something I was kind of nervous. That was I think my second ever cryptid hunt that I ever have done. And
Oh, you went looking?
yeah, we actually went looking. So there are so many different versions of these so-called melon heads, but there are two particular stories that usually are talked about the most. And this case, where they're located is in Kirtland, Ohio, which is a suburb of Cleveland. And anyways, these two stories stand out the most. Both of them star a mysterious doctor named Dr. Crow, or nicknamed Dr. Melonhead. And in one version of the story, he was working for the government and was experimenting like with radiation, either working. Supposedly, it depends on who you talk to. They say he was either working during either the Civil War, late 18 or early 1900s or working during World War I or World War II or the Great Depression of the 30s. And his wife was exposed to a lot of this radiation, and his family, his children were all born deformed and mutated. His wife became very ill. The government did a cover up, gave him like this nice shrouded land out in this wooded area in a town called Chardon, and said, hey, please keep quiet about this. Now, the second story is a little bit more sinister, but it's also kind of the most notorious version. Dr. Crow again, but this time he was working at an orphanage or a hospital, and he was experimenting on children. And some of these kids, tragically, had already had deformations. Their heads were oversized. They had, as what we now know is called hydrocephalus,
Water babies.
Yeah, in a way, yes. And what he would sometimes do is sometimes he would inject more fluid into their heads, which made their heads even bigger to a point where they barely looked even human anymore. And sadly, a lot of these kids died. I mean, these were vicious experiments, atrocities. And he eventually ended up creating a bunch or a tribe, if you will, of these kids that became feral, almost animal-like. They had like razor-sharp teeth, these huge heads and stuff. And as the story progresses, eventually these kids, the surviving kids, find. Well, and you also have to remember too, unlike today, where we see with orphanages and foster care, where we have CPS that goes in and check in and make sure that they're in good living conditions. Unfortunately, back in those days, they didn't have any of that, so nobody.
People like that are why we had that.
Yeah, exactly. So back then, nobody knew what was going on at that time. So there were these kids were going through these horrific experiments, and no one knew this was happening. But as the story goes, the surviving kids eventually have had enough, and we're not going to put up with this. And they finally turn on the doctor and kill him. Some say that they cannibalized him, they cut him up or whatever. And then it was said afterwards that they burned down the rest of the facility and they escaped off into the woods. And supposedly they started living off first, on animals that they could find, but then they started going as far as, not to get too graphic, but to inbreeding, to cannibalism and whatnot. And that's when these so-called melon heads began. And it's not just restricted to Ohio, though, because as time went on, some of these deformed individuals decided to leave the area just so they could get away from there. And as a result, not only have we still been having sightings and reports of these creatures in Ohio to this day, but we also began getting reports of these creatures from the 1940s on in Michigan, Florida, North Carolina, Maine, and Connecticut especially. So they're also kind of all over the place. And I think one of the most scary aspects of these creatures, these melon heads, is that, if you saw one of these creatures, even with these horrific deformities they have and these large heads, you could still tell in some way that
For
unlike all the
me,
other cryptids out there. They weren't really monsters to begin with. So if you saw one, you could still tell in some way, shape, or form that at some point, they were human and were driven underground, inbreeding and cannibalism.
the bad part about that too, while that what happened to them obviously is tragic, the fact that they still people would still recognize their humanity would make them more vulnerable.
Yeah, they have this whole paranoia of society. So that's why they're very aggressive. Like when anybody, comes into their territory. And I was excited to have the opportunity of wanting to investigate, uh, you know, the Melonheads territory. But, we were originally going to go at night. So
Oh,
I was kind of nervous because I didn't know
I don't
what.
think that would be a good idea.
Thankfully we didn't have to. We decided not to. We just ended up going during the day. But I was even telling Tommy, I wasn't even joking, saying that if we end up going there, and we were supposed to go with someone else, Sean Gilmore, who was with us. We were supposed to go with him. Unfortunately, he had to cancel at the last minute. But I literally said to these guys, saying, "Look, if we're going to investigate this, we better first of all, we need to stay on the main road. We are not going into the woods itself because, I mean, yeah, we were already in the woods, but we weren't going to go off off the
Yes.
road because if these creatures really did exist and they had this, they had this paranoia of society, there's absolutely no doubt in my mind that some of those areas were probably booby trapped.
Yeah.
And who knows what could have happened to
Well,
us. But
because they still have human intelligence, right?
exactly. Now,
So,
a lot of people have also said too, like what in fact, like the descriptions of like what they are. So, like from what I've also heard too, is that the classic melon head description is said to be smallish, about 3 to 4 feet tall, pale, large-headed, hairless individual, veins popping out of the heads. They're said to make animalistic type sounds in order to communicate with each other. They usually only come out at night. They either have dark or glowing red eyes,
mhm.
and usually they have, of course, biped 2 legs, dirty clothes, or ripped up or torn clothing, usually stained with blood or other substances. Come to think of it, a better way to describe them, I think they probably look a lot like what we think aliens look like. You know,
Well, I could see that, and I also think that they would not be closed because
well,
they wouldn't have societal pressures on them to cover themselves.
yeah, that's the other thing too. I mean, I think there was also some reports where sometimes they didn't have any type of clothing at all. At all. In addition to that, too, it is said that they like to watch cars go by. Like they saw them first, watching them first. Chasing or approaching a melonhead usually will cause them to run in both cases. Now, that same area that we went to, I've been told that many people have been chased out of those woods a lot, allegedly by melonheads. Although most people have claimed they've never actually have seen a melonhead chasing them. What gets them to drive out to the woods, get out of the car, and investigate is what they believe to be a melonhead. But what chases them back to the car and drive out of the woods, obviously, is anyone's guess. But like what you said, it seems sick and sad, but that legend persists. Now, some people have even asked, even though we never found any evidence, it's still kind of one of those things that, if anyone was to ask me, do I believe in melon heads? I'm not fully sure, at least not yet, because we didn't encounter anything. But I sure as hell probably would not want to go out there by myself at night, especially alone.
Well, that's just the nature of that, right? Because regardless of what you want to call it, there's stuff that happens.
Yeah, there's
And
and there's sometimes dangers involved too when you try to go out, especially for this. In this case, with these creatures, you got to
mhm.
be very well aware of the dangers that you're kind of facing when you're going out in an area like that.
And I think that you have to be fully prepared to do what you have to do to protect yourself.
There,
And I think that's with any cryptid encounter, any cryptid investigation. You can't go without being, I mean, I don't think you can go without being armed in some shape, form, or fashion. I do know that there are reports that Bigfoot responds to weapons in a negative manner. And that's on that. You got nervous, did you?
Yeah, I was. Well, like I said, I was a little bit nervous on this occasion because, like I said, it's unlike all the other cryptids. We're dealing with creatures that are, again, like that were once human. So,
Yeah.
these, as I would say, these were your backwoods people, almost like from hell. These were
Yeah.
like these type of people that, like, unless you're ready to encounter them, like I was, even though I was nervous, this was something that you do not want to ever encounter if you're ever lost. If you even saw something almost that looked distinctly like them, you go the other way and run. I mean, I think, in fact, there's been at least 2 movies that kind of have based off the melon heads, and that's The Hills Have Eyes, which
Mm-hmm.
the big difference, the only difference compared to The Hills Have Eyes and the melon heads is that with the melonheads, they live in a heavily forest area. With Hills Have Eyes, it takes place in a desert instead. And I think even the Wrong Turn movies, I think, may have gotten some inspiration from the melonhead legends as well. So, and there have been a few movies made on the story, but I think when I said before, Connecticut especially gets the most notorious area of these creatures. And this is something that people have actually done in the past. There was a particular road in a town called Trumbull in Connecticut. And there's a road.
Really called Trouble?
No, Trumbull.
Oh,
Trumbull.
I was like, you called it Trouble?
No, Trumbull.
I would not move to a town called Trouble. But go ahead.
There's a backwoods road in the wooded areas of Trumbull, which is to the locals, it's just simply called Velvet Street. But to everybody else and to some of the locals, because of its eerie atmosphere, it's known as Dracula Drive. And
I would not live on that street.
Yeah, well, and the dare, if you will, is when people try to go out and search for these melon heads, is that the way out it's supposed to work, and I'll never do anything like this ever, where you drive on Dracula Drive at night, and worse, you have someone get out of the car and then leave them behind so they can encounter these melon heads themselves, like to give them that huge scare. It's like, the hell are you doing?
Not just no.
I mean, that's like that's suicide, if you will. And again, they've had, in fact, I think the show Monsters and Mysteries in America did a segment on it, and they actually did interview one guy who, when he was a teenager, he and his friends, they went down on Velvet Street, and they went, of course, after dark. They didn't really see anything, although they did chillingly find a dead deer by the side of the road, which they knew was not from hunters, just the way out it was killed. So his friends got really freaked out. They decided to end their legend trip in this case. But this guy was still so much more curious of, like, there's no way that, there's no way this could exist. So a few nights later, he went back to Velvet Street. This time he went by himself. And he went down the road, and as he was driving down the road, he thought he could see a figure down just a few feet ahead of him. So he got out of the car, and he had a flashlight with, and he decided to investigate.
So he was stupid.
Yeah, and he got out, and he saw this large-headed creature, probably about 4 feet tall. I think it might have been feasting on the deer, I think. And all of a sudden, this thing, like, literally, like, shot up, and and when the creature saw him, it literally started chasing him back to his guide. This guy was like running for his life. I mean,
literally,
he literally said he was expecting a hand to, like, grab onto his shoulder, but he managed to get back into the car and drive as quickly as possible before the creature could get him. And he said to this day, although he still lives in Connecticut, he has not been back on Dracula Drive, and he will say these are not creatures, like, unless you're with a group, because surprisingly, much like Bigfoot groups, there are search groups that do try to find evidence of these creatures. Mm-hmm. Unless you're with a group, you definitely do not want to go on this road by yourself. These creatures are not to be messed with. They will hunt you down, and despite their deformities, they're not here to put on a freak show or anything like that. They are pretty much the real deal, in my opinion, alongside another cryptid the devil monkey in this case. I think the melonheads are probably amongst some of the most dangerous cryptids that does exist out there.
Well, if they have human intelligence and they have inhuman abilities or speed or whatever else, I mean, that doesn't necessarily mean that they have inhuman abilities. The fact that this guy who runs and hunts and does everything in the woods was able to keep up with a guy that doesn't do that and almost catch him getting into his car, that's I mean, that's a stupid acts get stupid prizes.
I think I would.
You don't go do that.
Yeah, I mean it's I've never been to Trumbull. Of course, I've never even been to Connecticut, at least not yet. But I'm
I
sure
haven't.
what I've heard is Trumbull is kind of one of those kind of forest towns. I think it kind of is in a forest area, so
Mm-hmm.
you probably have a lot of people out there, who go out and hunt for a living and whatever. And usually, a lot of people, in those parts of the country, obviously do that. But for an area like this that involves these creatures in Velvet Street, as you could very well imagine, it's an area that even hunters tend to avoid because they
I would
don't.
think.
So it's definitely a pretty creepy area. But it's in fact there were one other account trying to keep it real short that I've looked up.
Oh, that's
There was
okay.
there was also one account that several years ago there was a construction company that was actually trying to repave the road at one point.
Oh,
Now,
really?
there was just there at one point there was probably only about 3 construction workers that were working on the road, and this also happened during broad daylight. It's not like some cryptids; it's not always at night. Some of this stuff has occurred during the daylight as well, and they were working on the road, and they noticed very quickly, again, typical of a lot of these cryptid encounters, they noticed very quickly that the forest became absolutely quiet. There was no wildlife, there was no insects, no birds. It was just quiet. It's like,
That's never good.
yeah, which is never good at all because that usually means there's predators nearby, or in this case, these creatures. And they said they heard several noises throughout the woods that sounded almost human-like, but at the same time, not necessarily. It sounded animal-like at the same time. And they tried looking for the noises, and they couldn't find where these voices were coming from. There obviously was no other cars there because, again, the road was being repaved, so there was nobody in that area that could have just parked down the side of the road and just walk over because it's nothing but woods and there's no
Yeah.
cabins. So, why would it, and no hiking trails either. So, why would anybody be walking by that area? And nonetheless, I guess, I don't know if they were familiar with the story of the Melonheads on Dracula Drive, but either way, it absolutely frightened these construction workers. And from what I remember hearing was 2 of the construction workers refused to come back after dark. And literally the third construction worker, he refused to ever go back to the road. I think he actually quit his job. So he got real scared when they had this encounter. They never saw him, but they heard him though. They knew they were there.
Well, I mean, if they were there working on the road, they were locals, so they knew. I wouldn't have
Yeah.
stayed either. And Tom brought up, the Beast of Bray Road, but yeah, that's one of the things. Have you talked to the guys from Small Town Monsters?
I have not, but I
No.
have been following their website. Hey, Nikki, Renee.
Hey,
Yeah, I haven't spoken with them, but I followed up with their website. I've actually gotten some of their information from that site too. So they've kind of actually helped me out with some of the reports and whatnot.
they're pretty
And
brilliant.
yeah,
I
they're
mean,
great. They're really great. But I have spoken with other investigators out there who in this case have investigated the Beast of Bray Road, and you might find this a little bit hard to believe. Bray Road, that's just only an hour north of me because
wow,
where
I didn't realize that.
I live in Chicago, even though I'm actually really 20 minutes outside the city, but
Hmm.
nonetheless, no matter where you are in Chicago, you're not too far from the Illinois-Wisconsin border. I'm only about literally an hour away.
Yeah,
And Jay, I can't remember, I don't know how to say his last name, but Jay
Bekachin.
is, Yeah. He's been someone we've spoken to on multiple
He's
occasions.
great.
Yeah, he's been to some of our cons actually. We've had him at the Chicago Ghost Con a couple of times. I've actually been I was actually a speaker one time back in 2017, and I was on the stage with him. We weren't talking about Beast of Bray Road. We were actually talking about the Mothman, along with a few other people that
I love the Mothman history.
Yeah, he's a great guy to chat with. But yeah, Bray Road is only about an hour north, and Tom and I did have the opportunity of going to Bray Road, and it's it's a very interesting road. I mean, it's not really that long of a road as everybody thinks. It's only like maybe about a 2-mile stretch of road. Yeah. Unfortunately, however, this is not, for those that don't know, you can't just simply, unlike with the case with the Melonheads in this case, you cannot, it's not really a place that you could actually investigate and find evidence for, because it's a rural road, and there are farmhouses, you know, off the side of the road. So typical of such areas like that, if you do try to do that, obviously you're trespassing, and most likely the farmers who live there, they will most likely meet you out there with a shotgun. So the only closest thing we could do was just kind of drive on the road like one direction, and then we went back a different direction. So, and we went, but again, the time that we went during the day. But, you know, even though we went during daylight, and even though it was nice and sunny outside, I couldn't help but notice, however, that because it was during the summer, we had the windows open. I did notice it was kind of quiet on that road. And I'm not just only, and I knew it was not just because of we were just out in this open farmland area. It was just, there was just something not right about it. Yes. So even if you're there on a bright sunny day, it's kind of an eerie road to be on. And what's also interesting is, although it's mostly private property, there was a farmhouse that, well, according to Tom, he told me this a couple weeks ago, that it's no longer there, but the owners of that farmhouse at one point did carve a 7-foot-tall statue of the supposed Beast of Bray Road right in front of their house. And would have been awesome. Yeah, it would have been awesome, of course, you know, to get out of the car and get a picture with it. But of course, it's not like the Mothman statue in Point Pleasant. It's not in a public area. It's on private property. But it was still cool to see. But according to what Tom had told me, that the statue, I think was, correct me on this, Tom, I think it was stolen, which I was kind of shocked.
Oh, my gosh.
Yeah, I was kind of
shocked. From their yard?
Yeah, it was in front of their yard. But I also found that kind of strange that it would be stolen, because a 7-foot-tall statue, I mean, that's well over 500-600, maybe more pounds. So
yeah, and you got to have a big truck to toss that into.
Yeah, if not even 1,000 pounds. So, like, imagine the amount of weight and time that it must have taken to move such a statue like that. So, but according to what, it was okay. I'm sorry, it was moved and replaced. It was moved or replaced. Okay, because I think the original statue, I think, was made out of wood. And so, unfortunately, I think, like anything, I think because of being exposed to the elements for so long, it's eventually going to rot away. So they had to make a new one and put it in its place so it could last a lot longer.
Well, you know, Linda Godfrey, who was also very involved in the Beast of Bray Road, as well as other Wisconsin cryptids and mysteries, towards the end of her time, was like, she would put things out on her porch when she was ill. And so she'd just sit out there, have her coffee or whatever, and leave something out there. And yeah, she'd go in, and when she'd come back out, there would be like a little toy dinosaur, or, you know, rocks, and she shared that on her Facebook page. And she and, you know, my boss, the owner of Fate Magazine, Phyllis Galdi, were best friends with Rosemary. And so the three of them are like the three amigos of the cryptid and, you know, weird world. It was like, Rosemary Gully was amazing. And she and Phyllis together, I only got to be around them together once, and it was so great. But, you know, the three of them spent their time researching this. Phyllis still loves it, you know, and she puts out a new magazine of Fate every quarter. It's fantastic. But, and by the way, she lives in the area of North Carolina that she lives on where there's no homes anymore for people. She still has hers and her goats are okay. And she has a pond that she uses for necessities. But, you know, it's really something when you think about these women and their time frame and how badass they were. You
They
know,
were. Well,
I
just
mean, they
like
are. I mean, Phyllis still is, but they were some seriously fierce women. And between ufology, cryptozoology, the paranormal, you know, everything unusual, these ladies kicked most of the guys' butts
they really
on
did.
the
I
stuff.
actually had the opportunity of meeting Linda Gottfried. Well, the first time I only got to see her up on the stage at Wisconsin Paracon several years ago, and then we got to see her. I think we had her once for the Chicago
Mhm.
Ghost Conference too. That was when I finally had the opportunity of meeting her in person. But on one occasion, I also did speak with her on Facebook, which, since her passing, I've kept those messages ever
Yeah.
since, as a way to kind of remember her. God rest her soul, of course. I spoke
Yes.
to her almost 10 years ago, and we did something. This will partially sound unrelated, but it's going to go right back to, because I actually did offer this to Linda Gottfried if she'd be interested. But when I used to be with my old paranormal group, Midnight Paranormal Society, we actually used to do something that was called cemetery crawls. I don't know if you ever heard of
Mhm.
that term before.
Yeah.
So in October of 2015, the guys that I was with at that time, they wanted to go first, like, check out some like cemeteries throughout that part of southern Wisconsin. And but I decided to take it. I decided to kind of take it one step further. I thought to myself, you know what? We're not going to be too far from Elkhorn. Maybe of course, that time I didn't know that this was private property. I said, why don't we go try and check out the Beast of Bray Road, just to see if we can find anything. And surprisingly, these cemetery crawls that we have, these were family friendly ones. So we would have had kids. But I thought, I thought to myself, thinking, who would really help us out with this? And I said it would have to be Linda Godfrey. So
Mhm.
I reached out to Linda, and it didn't take long for her to get back. Surprisingly, I was really surprised I was able to hear back from her. And I said, hey, we're kind of doing this. We're doing this something called cemetery crawls, and we're also thinking about checking out Bray Road. And I was wondering if you wanted to come out and try to, want to investigate with us. And she said she was definitely interested. The only problem was, and this is when I learned that most of Bray Road was private property. But she did, however, tell me about another location that, yes, was a little bit further north, but it was definitely public to go to. And
Oh, cool.
she suggested this area called Kettle Moraine State Park.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah,
Yes.
and that was first time that was first time I ever heard of this area. And she told me that for years they've gotten reports of both big ape-like and dog-like creatures there all the
Yeah.
time. So I thought to myself, what other better way to go to an area where you not only had dogman sightings, in this case the Beast of Bray Road, but even reports of Bigfoot as well.
Consistent reports of Bigfoot. That is a fantastically active area for that.
That's probably about, considering it's a little bit further north, I would say that's probably about an hour and a half away from me. So that's the best part about this whole thing is, you talk about all these cryptids and stuff. Like, every state has their own cryptid. And I'm
Mhm.
fortunate enough that even though it's more Wisconsin, still, I'm not that far away from that area. So I could
Nope.
basically go at will. That's kind of the
And if you
coolest
go
thing.
to Kettle Moraine, you will hook up with Jay Beckerton.
Oh, yeah,
That's
that's
his
that's what's
stomping
great.
ground.
Yeah, I've already
And
said to myself, if given the chance of going to Kettle Moraine State Park soon, I already plan on contacting Jay for that occasion.
yes, we have a question for you. And it's from April. And she says, are there skinwalkers in Wisconsin? Asking because kids around there talk about it to her kids there in Marathon County. Is that something that you're familiar with?
You know, for the longest time, I always thought, I'm sure a lot of people kind of investigators thought the same thing. I always thought for the longest time skinwalkers was just kind of more restricted to the western part of the country, like, Utah with Skinwalker Ranch,
Mhm.
or states like Colorado, Utah, Arizona, California, and New Mexico. That's what I thought for the longest time. But now I've learned that they're not restricted to just that part of the country, because I honestly now believe that maybe there are skinwalkers in Wisconsin. What made me change my mind, in fact, was, again, believe it or not, was one of the more newer but probably better paranormal shows, in my opinion. I don't know if you've ever seen that show. It goes by two different names. Either it's These Woods Are Haunted or
Mhm.
Terror in the Woods.
Yeah.
There was an episode for season 3, I think one of the first episodes, in which they interviewed someone who, ironically enough, lives down in southern Illinois, and they had an encounter with a skinwalker. And I thought to myself at that time, thinking, "Oh, that's kind of odd. I never heard of a skinwalker, in this case in southern Illinois, or the state of Illinois entirely." That was something new. Because again, at the time, I thought it was just kind of a more southwestern kind of thing. But I was later told that, yes, a lot of them are usually in the southwestern areas, but that doesn't mean that you can encounter these, that they're in other states. So if Illinois has skinwalkers, then there is no doubt in my mind that Wisconsin would probably have them as well.
And the practices that create skinwalkers are not limited to the American Southwest. So you
Yeah.
have
So
people that make bad decisions all over the world.
for the longest time, I was always kind of restricted to somewhere these paranormal entities are. But now that I've been hearing more reports, I no longer have that restriction. I think, okay, well, if we got like skinwalkers in this case here in Illinois and Wisconsin, then that means there's probably they're probably in other states, and you'd be surprised. It's no different than Bigfoot in this case, because for years we always kind of associated like with Bigfoot for the Pacific Northwest. But
Mm-hmm.
now we got, not surprisingly, there's Bigfoot reports. There's a lot of them now in the southern states. We've even had our own reports, in this case for Illinois and Wisconsin. And then you look at other parts of the world, where they have their own report. Like, to throw some examples, like the skunk ape or
Mm-hmm.
Florida swamp ape,
Oh,
has been
yes.
seen primarily in the southeastern United States. Yeah, they're a little bit different in appearance, but they're still considered a cousin of Bigfoot. I've always heard they're like little chimpanzees. The Urans of China is a little bit more related to Bigfoot, perhaps.
Mm-hmm.
Now the abominable snowman, in this case, the Yeti, even though it has a similar appearance, it's a much different creature. It's much more anthropoid. It
Mm-hmm.
goes down on all fours. And first off, just wanted to give a shout out to Nikki, who's also from Australia.
Yeah.
You got quite a couple of viewers from Australia watching right now.
Cool
And
beans.
Australia is no exception too. They got their own reports of Bigfoot, which over there you got the Yowie over there.
Oh, okay.
That's what they call
And
them.
I'm going to tell you that I did not know that.
Yeah, they're called the Yowies, although sightings of Yowies compared to even though Bigfoot reports usually here are relatively rare, not surprisingly, the Yowie in Australia is a much more, their sightings over there are much more rare. So, but I know Finding Bigfoot had done an episode on the Yowie, so
Mm-hmm.
it's gotten some attention.
Well, that's interesting, but it's not unusual, I think, for anything in Australia to be less reported because there's so much more empty space.
Yeah,
And
considering that, like, you think about the areas like in Australia, like the outback, there's
mm-hmm.
very few people live in those areas. So you can imagine just those
Free
particular
reign.
areas that are still uninhabited. You kind of wonder, like, how often would these creatures be seen if you were to live in that area?
Exactly. Well, we are getting low on time. And I want you, because most of the people know you, but I want you to let the people that are going to be listening that follow other work that I do that may not be strictly on the paranormal side, and now they're going to know that you're not too. But tell them where to find you and what you do, what they need to know to find more information about you.
Okay, so the main profiles that I use, if you guys want to, you could obviously find me on Facebook. You could also find me on YouTube also because I know we don't have much time, but for those that don't know, as you know, I also do audiobooks for scary stories. So if you're looking to listen to hear some good scary stories, it's all on my YouTube channel, which is it's just my full
Scary,
name.
scary, scary stories presented in the dark, right?
Yeah, which I also had started a fan page for that too. Scary Stories Presented in the Dark, which I present. If you're familiar with the original Scary Stories to Tell in the Dark trilogy, I present those. There's been many tribute books that have been coming out over the years. There's actually a couple new ones, believe it or not, that's coming out soon. So we're going to be doing some new audiobooks sometime in the future. So you can find me on those. And also, I'm a co-founder of the Things Network. So obviously, if you want to check out the other shows we got on this show to offer, including my show, Nick Files, which I'm hoping to I'm really hoping to bring back eventually. Definitely check us out. There's a lot of stuff.
There is a lot of stuff.
We've of course we got actually some of the Nikki and Robert from Australia. They're actually show hosts now. They've actually became our very first show host that we have from Australia. So we've really expanded now into 4 continents. So for anybody that wants to check out, shows from different parts of the world and whatnot, Paranormal Chat as it's
We're going to be checking that out.
Yeah, so I would just say, if you guys want to see not only just my work, but want to see everybody else's work, come check us out, support us, and see what we got to offer, including my show, The Nick Files.
Which is great. So for everyone listening, we are so out of time, but I just so appreciate every one of y'all being here. This is a really great opportunity. If you are a paranormal host or if you're a paranormal investigator that's looking for more information, the Things Network has so many programs, and we're starting. In fact, we have started a Roku channel that I'm part of, and most everybody that I know that's doing shows with this network and with Things are on there, and it's called the Dark Realm Network. It's a subscription channel on Roku, $4.99 a month, and you can do it yearly too, but it's nothing but paranormal content. And it's a lot of fun. It's really interesting. They're great, great shows. You'll find everybody I know doing that. So check it out.
I should just throw this out real quick. I'm excited to announce, since you mentioned about Dark Realm Network, Nick Files is now officially on Dark Realm Network. So I've expanded to it, and I just saw the so-called 3 J's. I just saw Jay, Jason, and Joe at a Paracon just a couple of weeks ago in early November. So they told me to take my time. I'm not in a rush of trying to get Nick Files back. I will get it back soon, but I am certainly honored to have to also now be part of Dark Realm Network. So it's truly.
Well, I can't wait till you have it back too.
Yeah, so. It will be back soon. Of course, I got to still go through the recovery. Of course, also with the holiday Christmas season, it's going to be kind of tough to kind of do that kind of stuff. But definitely,
when you're back, I'll be watching.
2025, I'll be back. I promise you guys.
I will be there. So, and thank you so much for being with me tonight, because I just absolutely enjoy you so much. You're always so positive. You're always just so kind. Your enthusiasm for the paranormal is contagious, and you bring so many people along with you. And I'm glad you're my friend. So thank you for all you do.
It's my pleasure. And if I could just throw this out real quick, 2025 is also going to be a big year for me, I think, for as far as the paranormal investigations are concerned, because this new year, I approach my 20th year of being involved in the field. So 20th anniversary, I definitely want to do some really amazing special things, to kind of give my 20 years of service, if you will. So I've become become like a veteran in this field at this point.
Perfect. Well, so I'll tell you what, I'll meet you somewhere and we'll investigate.
Yep. 2005, from 2005 to 2025. It's been a long run.
Well, I love it. And I just think the world of you. So I'll come investigate with you. We've never done that.
We'll make it happen one way or another.
Sure we will. So for everyone, thank you so much. We'll see you next time. Same cat time, same cat channel, and namaste. Be blessed.
Thank you. Good night.